Hola a todos, hoy vamos a hablar de las palabras o y ni in español. So today we're going to talk about the words o and ni in Spanish. As you would see, o is also a letter, but o can be used as a conjunction to mean or. So both of these are conjunctions. Ni translates as nor. Okay, so o and nor are conjunctions, and a conjunction is a word that connects sentences, or it can be used to connect. What I meant to say is that it is used to join sentences, but it can also be used to connect elements or words, ideas, what have you, within a sentence, right? So yes, o and ni. As I said, o translates as or. So we use o in the affirmative meaning positive, meaning that the sentence is not negative, when there are options. So if we want to talk about alternatives or choices, we use o. And in this context, we use the o before the last option, right? So it is, of course, it is not limited to two. That's another structure that we'll get to shortly. But in this context, when we have options, we use o before the last option, right? So it doesn't matter whether there are 5 options, 6 options, what have you, we use the o before the last option, right? So let's look at these examples, even though these contain 2, right? But yeah, just remember, we can have more than 2 options. Ejemplo número 1. ¿Quieres salir o quedarte en casa? Do you want to go out or stay home? So we have 2 options, right? ¿Quieres salir? We could ask someone that question, but if we want to add an alternative, we use o, and then of course we put that alternative. Yes. So this is how we use or. Just a simple example of how or is used. I mean o, rather. Mi hermana prefiere jugar al fútbol o al tenis. My sister prefers to play football or tennis. Once again, mi hermana prefiere jugar al fútbol. That in of itself is a complete idea, a sentence. But if I want to add an alternative or another option, I use o and then that other option, right? So my next option would be o al tenis. So if I want to reply to that, I could say mi hermana prefiere jugar los dos. Los dos meaning both, right? That's right. And of course, los dos, that expression has to be masculine because we're talking about 2 sports, right? Al fútbol, al tenis, and both of those sports are masculine. So we use los dos to replace them, both of them, right? So mi hermana prefiere jugar los dos. That's a potential response, right? So as you see, we use o when we want to talk about alternatives, right? Now I would have alluded to this earlier when I said that there's a structure that we use when we're talking about when we're talking about 2 options, right? And that structure is either or, which in Spanish would be o, right? With this one, if we just use one o, we can have as many options as we want, but we place the o before the last option. But with either or, we have to have two options, right? Because these talk about two situations or scenarios that cannot coexist. They cannot occur at the same time. It is either one or the other, right? So this is how we construct it. O goes before the first option, and then O goes before the second option, right? So for example, o vamos al cine o vamos a la playa. Either we are going to the cinema or we are going to the beach. You see? O goes before the first option, and then O goes before the second option. If I were to say vamos al cine o vamos a la playa, that would translate as we are going to the cinema or we are going to the beach. We will not use either there because we only use one O, right? So that structure requires that both O's are utilized. Similarly, so before we go on, it's either one or they're done. It's either one or the other. We can't do both of them. It's either we go to the beach or it's either we go to the cinema or we go to the beach. Yeah? O me pagas o dejo de trabajar. Either you pay me or I stop working. One has to give. Yep. O me pagas o dejo de trabajar. Yep. So this structure is not very complicated, right? I think the negative counterpart might be a little trickier, but this isn't too complicated, right? So O, when we use O, one O, we use that to introduce an alternative, and it is used with the last option in the list of alternatives, right? And if we use two O's, if we use O before the first option, if we want to say either or, meaning that we're referring to two scenarios, only two, we use O and O. O before the first option, O before the second option, right? Good. Super. Now it's time to go on to the negative counterpart when it comes to this particular topic, which should be ni. So ni translates as nor or, right? And we'll get to that shortly. Nor is used in the negative to introduce another element. So nor is used just like or, right? In that it introduces another element, but this time we're talking about negation. So it's just a negative counterpart or the negative version of or. That's what we would say nor is. It's a negative version of or. But you notice that I had nor or, right? So let's see what I mean. No me refiero a la nacionalidad ni al idioma. I am not referring to nationality or language. We can use or here. Well, at least in the translation, we can use or here. Okay? Because the verb is negated. In English, if the verb is negated and we are talking about options, even if we're in the negative, we can use or here. Because if I were to put nor here, it would probably, like if I were typing this in, let's say Microsoft Word, and I were to put nor here, the computer would probably identify as a grammatical mistake. But you can use or here. I am not referring to nationality or language, right? Because this verb is negative, okay? But in Spanish, you have to use ni because we're talking about negation. So it's a little different. In English, I could use or here, which is actually a positive, right? But in Spanish, you must use ni. So I cannot say no me refiero a la nacionalidad o al idioma. No, that would be incorrect. Yeah, I have to use ni because it's negative, right? Because as you know, in Spanish, double negatives are permitted. In English, no. Yes, that point is coming soon. The need and now, but let me continue. Nunca volveré a beber ni fumar. I will never drink or smoke again. Same thing, we use or because the verb is already negated. So we don't say I will never drink nor smoke again. It sounds a little awkward, but you can use or here. You can use or here. But once again, if you're talking with a negative, I can't say nunca volveré a beber o fumar. No. You can't use or. Or has to be used in the affirmative, right? But in the translation, it can be used in a negative. But this is English, right? So yes, ni is basically the negative version of o. We use it to introduce another element, but when we're talking about negation, right? So just like we did either or, we are going to talk about neither nor. Now in English, nor is usually used with neither. This is why in these two sentences we use or, because nor is used with neither. They usually go together, right? So ni goes before the first element and ni goes before the second element, right? Ni los profesores ni los alumnos saben la respuesta. Neither the teachers, first element, nor the students know the answer. Yep. So ni and ni. You can use ni before nouns, obviously in this context. Right. So you're saying neither of them know the answer. If you wanted to respond to that, you could say, ninguno de los alumnos saben la respuesta. No, sorry. Ninguno de ellos saben la respuesta. None of them knows the answer. Because we have to, they're masculine, so we use ellos to group them. And you're saying none of them, so ninguno, because it's masculine, the ninguno has to be masculine, so none of them, ninguno de ellos sabe, in English we would say knows. None of them, that structure would be singular. But, that's a very good question. I'll have to double check on that one. But I know in English we would say no, the verb would have to be singular. But in Spanish, I'm wondering if it would be sabe or saben. None of them. Okay, we'll say saben. Ninguno de ellos saben la respuesta. But I know in English it would be singular, the verb. But we'll double check on that one. Because I know sometimes, languages are different, right? Yes. No estoy ni feliz ni triste. I am neither happy nor sad, right? So ni goes before feliz because that's the first option, and ni goes before triste. Now, you would see that this contains three negatives: no, ni, and ni. And this brings us to a very important point. If if that structure follows the verb, then the verb must be negated. So the first verb has to be negated, okay? So for example, anoche no vi ni a Mariana ni a Susana. Last night I saw neither Mariana nor Susana. You would see that the verb is negated. The verb ver, we use it in the preterite. It is already it is negated, right? That is important. I cannot say anoche vi ni a Mariana ni a Susana. No, the verb has to be negated. That's a grammar rule when it comes to using ni, right? This could also translate as last night I did not see Mariana or Susana. Once again, we can use or in English if the verb is already negative, right? But since we're using neither nor, that structure, then this is how we would translate it in English. I saw neither Mariana nor Susana. Yeah. Another point to note, you would realize that here I would have used ni before the last option, right? But I did not use ni here before the first option, right? So in this case, this is where we're just using or, right? But if the verb is negated, then you really and truly don't have to use ni before the first option, technically. So this could also translate as I am neither referring to nationality nor language. Rather, I am referring neither to nationality, wait, no. I am neither, yeah, I was correct. I am neither referring to nationality nor language, right? Right. That can also translate as this structure because the verb is already negated. So if the verb is already in the negative, it could you don't need to put ni before the first option. But of course, ni would have to go before the second option. So technically speaking, both of these have the same meaning, essentially, right? So sometimes you may see the first ni being omitted or being left out from being excluded from the first option, right? But that's fine once the verb is negated, right? Same thing here. So I could also say nunca volveré ni a beber ni fumar, right? That would be I will, well, no. No, scrap that, no. But yeah, once the verb is negated, that would work for this one, but not for this one. Once the verb is negated, you don't necessarily have to use the ni before the first option, right? So yeah, ni can translate as nor or are, right? So this is how we use nor. You see, it's a little more complicated than the either or structure, but once you practice them and study them well, you should be good, right? Okay, so this brings us to the end of this lesson. Espero que ustedes hayan entendido este tema. Muchas gracias por ver y nos vemos.